I will not begin with the state, or the revolution, or the great forces of history. I will begin with this, a single ordinary thing, the kind your whole life is built out of, and you never look at twice. Every such thing has two lives. First, it is useful. A coat keeps you warm. Bread feeds you. Call that its use value, what it does, what it's for. But the moment it goes to market, it grows a second life. Now it is worth something. So many coats equal so much bread, equal so much money. Call that its exchange value. And here is the first strange thing. Those two lives have almost nothing to do with each other. So I ask the question the economists skip past. When you trade a coat for anything else, what is the hidden thing being measured? Not the warmth. Warmth cannot be weighed against bread. The only thing every product of labor has in common is the human labor poured into it, human effort in the abstract, hours of one life spent. That is what value is, not a property of the thing, a quantity of someone's life congealed and carried inside it. Which means the price tag is telling you about a human being and pretending to tell you about an object. Hold on to that, everything else follows from it. Now watch what happens to that ordinary thing once it becomes a commodity. A table is just wood, you can see that, but the instant it steps onto the market, it transcends itself, it stands on its head and spins grotesque ideas out of its wooden brain. I am only half joking, because something genuinely uncanny occurs. The relationships between people who worked, how long, for whom, vanish from sight and reappear disguised as relationships between things, as prices, as one object being worth another. This is what I call the fetishism of commodities. In the old religions, men made idols with their own hands and then knelt before them, convinced the idol had power over them. We do exactly the same thing in the marketplace. We produce a whole social world by our labor, and then we bow to its prices as if they were laws of nature, forces beyond us, written into the stars. The market seems to rule us, but the market is only us, our own labor, our own relations, in a mask we've forgotten we made. The thing has come alive, and the people behind it have turned into things. Until you can see that reversal, you cannot understand a single day of your economic life. Here is a riddle that should keep you up at night. The ordinary person sells in order to buy, sells corn, gets money, buys a coat. Money is just the bridge, but the capitalist does the reverse. He starts with money, buys, and ends with money, more of it than he began with. He doesn't want the goods, he wants the difference, money that breeds money, in a restless, never-ending loop. And the question is, where does the extra come from? Not from cheating in the exchange. If everyone simply swindled everyone, no new wealth would appear in society as a whole. So where? To find out, you have to leave the noisy marketplace, where everything looks free and equal, and follow them through a certain door, the one with the notice that reads "No admittance except on business," the hidden abode of production, the workplace. And there the secret is finally laid bare. The capitalist has found one commodity unlike any other, a commodity that, when you use it, creates more value than it costs to buy. That commodity is a human being's capacity to work, labor power. You are paid for your day, but in part of that day you've already produced enough to cover your wage. Everything you make after that, the surplus, you hand over for nothing. That unpaid portion of your life is where all profit comes from, not from cleverness, not from risk, from the hours of yours that are quietly kept. Now, if the surplus comes from those extra hours, the logic is merciless. The capitalist isn't cruel by temperament, he's cruel by structure. He must lengthen your day, speed your hands, thin your wage, because his rivals are doing the same, and the one who relents is destroyed. Capital, I wrote, is dead labor, which, like a vampire, lives only by sucking living labor, and lives the more it sucks. That is not an insult, it is a description of how the thing actually feeds, and it never sits still. The money goes out only to come back larger, then out again through the whole circuit of buying, producing, selling, returning, a system that must grow or die. As it grows, it replaces people with machines and casts the surplus workers aside into a reserve, an army of the unemployed kept waiting at the gate. Their hunger is useful. It disciplines everyone still inside. So at one pole, wealth accumulates, at the other, in the very same motion, so does poverty. They are not two problems. They are one process seen from two ends. The misery is not a flaw in the machine, the misery is the machine running correctly. And now the final mystification, the one that makes the whole arrangement look eternal and just. The economists present three tidy sources of income: capital earns profit, land earns rent, labor earns wages. Three streams, each from its own natural spring. It is beautifully done, and it is nonsense. Capital is not a thing that produces, it is a social relation. Land grows no money. There is only one source, human labor, and these three sources are merely the slices into which the loot is carved, each slice dressed up as if it had created itself. This is the bewitched, upside-down world, haunted, as I once put it, by Monsieur Capital and Madame Land, things that strut about as if they were people, while real people are reduced to things, a religion of everyday life. We are taught to see profit as the natural fruit of money, the way an apple is the fruit of a tree, and to never ask whose hours grew it. But the same system that concentrates the wealth also concentrates the workers, trains them, organizes them, presses them together until they begin to understand the machine they are inside. Production has already become social, only the owning remains private. That contradiction cannot hold forever. The shell I wrote is burst asunder. The expropriators are expropriated. A pause. I did not invent that ending. I read it in the books of those who defend the system. They simply never turn to the last page.